We have spent decades teaching men how to succeed externally, but far less time teaching them as a culture, teaching them how to navigate internal transitions with emotional resilience, self awareness, and community. To guide us through unfiltered midlife for men is our PWT mentor expert, Youssef Scally, founder of Scalability Coaching. He is our walking coach. And of course, we have Renee Prosenko, founder of GetRightSize.ca and co host of Unfiltered, proudly in our prime. Welcome, Youssef.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.
You are one of the pioneers and champions and truth teller of men's mental health. Very little messaging as such is out in everyday narrative, especially when it comes to leadership, when it comes to identity, when it comes to emotions such as grieving. And right now men are having it tough. They are.
Absolutely.
And a lot of it has to do with the fact that men tend to isolate because they feel they have to put the strong front. And in the meantime, i- men's mental health is at a crisis point. So guide us through this topic, Yusuf.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that, Dr. Carolina. I don't see that I carry the message enough because whatever and how much I we can talk about men's mental health, it will never be enough. And the same thing applies for women's mental health because I'm really glad to see that there is more conversations around mental health for all genders, yet we take it as a reward. While it's not enough, we still need to talk more about it. And this is why I keep talking about men's mental health, men's mental well being, and men's mental awareness the same way as I talk about women's mental health. Funny enough, just Sunday, I contributed into the Run for Women race that was taking place in Canada for women's mental health. And I was just so happy to see as many men in the race for women's mental health, which doesn't happen for men's mental health race, by the way. But
That is true. And you know what? Mental health, especially around midlife, it's not only a medical conversation, it's really a leadership
yeah,
conversation, a relationship conversation, and increasingly, finally, a human conversation. Renee,
absolutely.
you see a lot in the work that you do with your within our community. What do you see?
Well, it's interesting when men retire. When all of us retire, but men, I think in particular, and they see their social circles shrink
Mhm.
after retirement. Their kids leave home. I mean, that's another reason how some of their social circles might shrink. If the family all went to curling together and now the kids have flew the nest, well, maybe the parents don't keep going, that sort of thing. And we know isolation can have a really serious impact on health. So, Yusuf, from a medical and wellness perspective, how important are for men specifically friendships and community and social connections for their overall longevity and well-being?
I'm so glad that you asked this because we talk about loneliness as the new epidemic, which is true again for all the genders, but focusing on men, especially at midlife, because the social connections, and that's also based on my experience, is that men socialize on an activity based
Mm.
connection, an activity based network, and rarely, if non existent, for just emotional, just for
Just to
presence,
talk.
just
Yeah.
for presence, just for that. So when there is that activity and you have been in a career for a long time, and then you're approaching the retirement, or you are retiring, that activity circle starts shrinking, as you well said, Renee. And then we find ourselves lost.
Mm.
Even before retirement, when I decided to leave my corporate career of 25 years, and all my life was built around that, that was the element that I undermined. I didn't think of it, of the emotional toll that it will have on me, of having that circle shrinking, because I thought, oh, my colleagues are my best friends, so that's fine. But then I realized that even that connection was, for big part, especially with my male colleagues, was linked to the job, was
Mm.
linked to the to specific environment.
Mhm.
So for the wellness, that's why Dr. Karina mentioned the walk-in coach as part of my coaching in motion approach. That's why I started actually having those walk-in coaching sessions to help my male clients to have an activity-based
Oh,
approach
Oh.
coaching. And I saw a big shift where men open up more to their emotions,
yeah.
because they don't, while walking, because they don't feel boxed in.
So what's
Talking
an
like
example?
talking's like truth serum. Sorry, Renee. Go ahead.
No, I'm curious. So what are some of these activities that you did that in a coaching format that enabled men to open up like that?
Well, it's walking. It's basically walking in outdoors in nature. And the most important thing is using metaphors spontaneously from our natural surrounding.
Mm.
And
So
then
talking about it without talking about it.
and then reflecting that back on their situation. I mean, simply last week I was in a session walking by falls, the Chaudière Falls in Ottawa, and just that was a perfect analogy to how our brain rush, but then moving, walking from the falls toward the river where it became calm, and then we started using that. It was just seeing that, and while doing activity, it just makes the conversation smoother. Having said that, is it enough? Because again, I'm talking about my clients, I'm talking about a group of people, I see an impact. Is it enough? And then I would like to talk, if you don't mind, about the role of women in men's mental
Oh,
health.
please do.
Yes.
Please. You will let us open the door for you. Come on in.
I feel really blessed because I am the only son in a family of five. So I have four sisters, and I grew up being aware of what of women influence on men's life, starting with my late grandmother, who is my refuge, my emotional support even after her death, my mother, and my sisters. At the same time, when I say I feel blessed, that was also, growing up was, I was feeling it as a punishment, because I had those two alternative words. What's happening in at home with my sisters around me, and trying to understand each other and teasing each other and fighting with each other like all siblings, and then the image that I felt I have to carry outdoor when I am not at home. At home, I was allowed to feel just by mimicking my sisters.
Mm.
While outside, I didn't feel that I had this permission, especially from women initially. I felt that I have to be the man who does things.
You know that
Not
before we go too far, I want to pin on that, Youssef, because it was actually a friend of mine that sent this clip to me that said women want men to be emotionally available, but they do not always like emotional men.
exactly.
So
I
how,
totally agree
I
with
know, right? Like,
I totally agree with that. And the only visible emotion that is socially acceptable for men, unfortunately, is anger. That's socially acceptable. Even we blame, we tend to blame, and this is an angry man.
anger and aggressiveness, like
Yeah.
drive, competitiveness,
But
right?
through my coaching, through my own life experiences, and then through my coaching, I came to understand that often anger is a secondary emotion and not the primary one. And in my case, anger most of the time manifests when as a secondary to sadness, as a secondary to helplessness, as a secondary to loneliness, more than the
Yeah.
Then
the
actually be
feeling
mad
really
at
angry.
something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
And I reached a stage in my life where I rarely get angry at something.
Mhm.
So speaking of grief, right? So grieving, we often think is, when we've lost someone, right? But really, grieving is about any and all loss. It could be about losing your job, it could be losing your health, it could be losing a loved one, a relationship, even your own sense of identity, which happens midlife, right? And in midlife is physiological, biological as much as it is psychological, right? Well, that was a mouthful. And what we don't stop and think about is that all the signs for anxiety and depression and grieving and all such, they look different for men that they do for women.
Yes. First, I would like to say that because listeners might be wondering what a values inspired coach known for coaching in motion and walking has to do with grief and men's mental health. The answer is really simple because most people, when they hear mental health, they hear problem. When they hear grief, they think of death.
Mhm.
For me, both, I hear life and I hear what matters to us, because it's really grief. It's about losing someone or something or a place or something that matters to us.
Yeah.
And to me, this can be a role, can be a person, can be a version of ourselves, can be an identity, a relationship, which I would like to come to that because I find it harder to grieve people who are alive than people who passed away. and and also and and also I think that the grief really sit at the intersection of values, mental health, and the adaptation, the emotional adaptability that I often talk about as part of my coaching. Now, for men specifically, as we talked, it's that there is anger, the visible emotion when it comes to grief, but also I have seen indifference in different
Mhm.
ways of loss, or a perceived, or I will say visible indifference, which is not really like I lived it when my father lost his mother, and he just went like immediately to action mode to arranging the logistics for the funerals, for the burial, for that. And then 3 days later, he was back to work and he was working harder than than usual. And I was thinking, oh, like how strong my dad. I should be proud of
Yeah.
I should be proud of him. He's really strong. It's only years later than we talked about this, and I understood that it was not a shutdown. It was not an indifference. It was just not knowing what to do with his emotion. It was an overwhelm of emotions.
And that bottling it up, like what you were just describing, is actually a famous anecdote of Ernest Hemingway, that when he lost his son, he very soon after began acting like everything was normal, and everybody came to him and said, like, how can you be, at a bar, like moving on with your life? Your son just died. And he said, well, I'm going to get over it someday. Might as well be today. Right now, he ended up unending, his life, right? Committing suicide. And that is, we just recently experienced the death of a Canadian icon, successful by all human standards. Mario Lemieux. I may be mispronouncing his last name. I'm Spanish, French. But we underestimate the pressure that men have to succeed and to maintain status, and but just putting it all inside until it overwhelms you.
Yeah.
Renee, you experience that with clients, don't you?
Well, here's what I find interesting, and I don't know that men are ever taught. Well, they're not. So, my husband and I both took uh, um, counseling many, many years ago before we even got married. Because, and we've always had a business coach. So we've had a business coach and we've had a family coach, we call it. And all of our kids, my kids, anyway, that's another story. But
Another episode.
another episode. But the point I want to make is this. I've been in women's group. John, my husband's been in men's group. And the men and women, but the men that go through, we call it group or therapy or whatever, learn a different language. And so when I hear my husband talking to someone on the phone, whatever, I know immediately whether he's talking to a high school friend or a friend from group from even 20 years ago, because they now have a different language, and it's
You
fascinating. So
mean
when he's with,
a broader emotional range? When you say a
no,
different language, what do you mean?
it's not the language, it's the topics they're willing to discuss and the introspection that they have and they're willing to share with each other. Whereas when his other friends are here that haven't gone down that road, they're talking, it's sports and weather and the kids, that kind of thing. And it's amazing the total difference in that kind of conversation, because they've had that foundation of coaching, emotional coaching.
And that's really important, Renee. And I'm glad to hear that your husband has this group. Often, when I ask my clients, who can you call when you don't need advice, you don't need strategy, you don't need solution, when you just need presence? And it saddens me that if they don't have a life partner, then the answer is I don't know, because they are so used to be the fixers. They are so used to be the solution, or they perceive themselves as the solution provider. You might not be expecting your men to be fixing all your problems, but they do expect that. And they can't be aware of it if they don't have that space that shows them that this is not really what is expected from you.
Exactly. Yeah.
And just because you have a life partner doesn't mean that you have the support,
Oh, yeah,
or
absolutely.
when showing vulnerability or emotion, because
But
on that clip.
sorry, Dr. Carolina, because that's really important, as you say, coming back to the role of women. When I talk to my female friends, just as a social, because I'm noisy and I'm curious and I like to ask questions. When I ask them what your top expectation from a life partner,
Mm.
most of the time, what comes back is composure, decisiveness, emotional control. When if I ask what you expect from a woman, emotional control doesn't come. It's usually it's more nuanced, and resilience. So back to the grief or any emotional challenge, actually, is that men, they don't want to show that, because it's a loss of that composure, it's a loss of that the decisiveness, it's a loss of that resilience, and they don't want to show that. This is why most of the men, they prefer to just show a shutdown or a kind of emotional numbness, while inside they are they are boiling. And even for leadership, we saw that most of the executives are rewarded for those the same things that I listed. So when we are faced with an emotional challenge or a mental challenge, some I saw some leaders, man, they fall apart not because they are grieving. They fall apart because they feel that they won't be rewarded enough if they show their emotions.
Yeah.
And our society, it rewards the group who control themselves, and even more than control, because that control doesn't mean anything, and often will notice
Appearance of control.
the appearance of control. But the ones who are exceptionally productive, the ones who are uploaded, even though if behind this high performance or high productivity, it's hiding an emotional challenge that nobody notices.
Now, Youssef, you are a citizen of the world. Is this a Western thing, or are men more emotionally fluent in other places that you have lived?
It's that's really an interesting question, because it has different dimensions. What I have seen in other parts of the world than North America, and I wouldn't label it East and West because I include Europe in the other part.
In the East or the West?
West.
No,
Well,
Europe.
in my mind, I include it in the West. So for me, it's not
Okay.
East and West, it's North America based on my experience, and then my experience in Europe, Middle East, and Asia. So
Okay.
you
Oh, so,
raise
so Europe's in the East.
it.
Eh,
If you
so the,
insist to call it
okay,
East
half
and
of
West.
Eastern Europe would be in the East. Western Europe would be in the West.
Yeah,
All
if
right.
you would like to. Okay, but that's not about geography. It's just what I have seen is that there is more awareness about loss of identity or loss in general. And here we are putting grief and mental health challenges together, because I think every mental challenge is a kind of grief, especially for men. Is that in other parts of the world there is more awareness about the different realities that are shifting simultaneously. In North America, when we think about that, it's mainly based on the past and the present, and less on the image of the future that we had and we are also losing, especially when we are grieving or when we are facing an emotional challenge. Because with the mental challenge comes the image of the man that have been built over years, and then suddenly that image is shaken. And still when I talk with men, I'm not therapist, so I try to do not focus on a healing, but I focus on how to move forward.
Mhm.
There is a difficulty to understand that there was a kind of future image that is part of what is lost, and I put it for our listener between quotes. But in other parts of the world, there is more awareness of those dimensions, because when we are grieving or when we are having a mental challenge, there are multiple levels. I like to look at it that way. From what level? It's we are not only grieving what we lost, but also our identity
Yeah,
attached
how we fit into that world that
to
we
that.
lost. Yeah.
That's the first two dimensions. And then in each dimension, there is the past, the present, and the imagined future.
Mm.
When I lost my grandmother, it took me a while to accept, because she was the only living one and she was like everything. She meant the world to me. And it took me longer to accept that suddenly I'm not the grandson to anyone anymore.
Mm.
And that was really hard, because that image of the grandson who had this unconditional love, who was had this person with whom I could be myself in my with my most vulnerabilities, and knowing that it's a judgment-free zone, and that still I like my cousins, if they listen they wouldn't appreciate that, but I like to think that I was her favorite grandson, and then suddenly that image was lost. But I remembered something, and maybe Dr. Carolina will recall that because I wrote about it in one of our chapters. The first time I was leaving my country of origin for a series of international assignments, the day I was leaving, my grandma hugged me and gently put her hand on my heart and said, "Remember, my son, whatever is here is elsewhere. What is not here is nowhere." And that sentence became my happy compass for everything in my life,
Wow.
for grieving, for mental challenges, for carrying things, places where I lived, and people that disappeared from my life in a way or another, carrying with me and choosing how to carry them. And also the image of myself before my burnout, and I choose to what remains from my past and how I can carry it forward.
I love the distinction of the imagined future. And Renee, I want to ask you, sorry, because you said something important there, Youssef, and Renee had expressed the same thought differently when it comes to moving on when feeling grief. And when you meet gentlemen that are having to right size or having to change where they live and such because of loss, because they find themselves alone, do you find that they are more likely to leap forward than women are in the same circumstances?
No, not at all. I find the opposite though. If it's the women that are planning forward, and I find most of the time, if it's a single man, especially if he's grieving
Mhm.
uh, for many things, but oftentimes in my line of work, he's grieving the loss of a partner, and so moving into a home that's more suitable. It's the family that is moving the process along. It's or something's happened where it's no longer a choice, it's a necessity. So no,
Oh,
I find the men have a real hard time. Yeah, and I think it's
you
because
see, I
the
would have
home.
thought, isn't it funny? Perception, right? I would have thought to be the other way around, that men would be more action driven, like, let's go, let's just get it over with, than women.
Not
And
when it comes to the nest, though. The
yeah,
nest
and
is the woman's domain, and
yeah,
it's an area where I find they just, you know, well, if they want to sell the riding lawnmower, no problem, right? But just moving home, moving the nest.
yeah, wow. And and back to perception, because being Latin, Latin Canadian, but being Latin, in Latin America, oftentimes the stereotype or the preconception is that they're macho men, right? And yes, they are, but Latin men are extremely emotional and extremely well. You've lived in Spain. Well, we're cousins with the Spaniard, but still,
Yes,
is they are so outward with their emotions that that macho is like one of many things that they're quite willing to carry on their sleeve, as you always know what they're thinking. There's no hidden there's not many hidden secrets in there. And I do find that in North America, from my experience, having lived now both in the US and Canada, I never, well, Mexico I would consider Latin America, but having lived in the US and Canada, it is more of a tough up, stiff upper lip kind of quiet down for men. And I think given what's going on in the world, in our economics and everywhere, we need to be kinder to men. They are our children, they are our brothers, our husbands, our fathers. And is we ought to do this together. So thank you, Youssef, so
Yeah,
much for
just
always
quickly,
bringing light.
thank you. Just quickly, what you said, it's exactly because my experience in Europe is based on France and Spain. And what you said about the Latin man, it's exactly why I said I put Europe with the other side compared to
Brilliant. Renee, walk us through the closing.
Yes, well, this has been a really wonderful conversation, Yusuf. Thank you very much for being on Unfiltered. And folks, this is a topic and others like it when it comes to health and wellness that we will be diving deeper into at our one-day showcase, Living in Your Prime. So please join us on Saturday, September 12th. All the information is below. Get involved with our community. There's lots coming up, and we are so grateful that you joined us for this wonderful episode. Thank you, Youssef. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Carolina, and we will see you next time.
Until next time.
Thank you.